And we're joined now by our economics correspondent, Stephen Long. Now, Stephen, given these figures released today, how achievable is that government promised surplus looking?
I think it's going to be very tough, Steve. We already have a situation where the global growth outlook is far weaker than it was when the budget was framed. The unemployment rate is higher. We had a projection from the Treasury that the unemployment rate this financial year would fall to 4.5%. It's standing at 5.3%. It's meant to be 5% in the year when we bring the budget back to surplus, theoretically. If the unemployment rate goes up, then the surplus could well go out the window. And commodity prices are falling, and with that, tax revenues, as the Treasurer said. I think that they've got a very hard task bringing the budget back into surplus when the projections are. And essentially, we're hostile to global events. We're hostile to the situation in Europe and North America and how that plays out around the world.
So in economic terms, how important is it that the government meets that target for a budget surplus?
Doesn't really matter at all. The political debate around this is extraordinarily silly. Whether we have a wafer-thin surplus, as was projected, or whether we have a small deficit in economic terms is immaterial. It is purely that the government's boxed itself into a corner by promising to bring the budget back to surplus, and the opposition's playing political games around that promise, and we've had a long-term situation where there's been a fetish about surpluses and a suggestion that surpluses are good, deficits are bad, which ignores the economic reality that, to a large extent, they're a product of economic circumstance and somewhat beyond government's control, beyond key decisions on spending. And so the whole debate is really, really silly. It doesn't matter very much in economic terms whether we have a small surplus or a deficit, small deficit.
You talked before about international economic conditions. What dangers lie ahead for Australia?
Plenty. A lot depends on China and how it withstands what's going on in Europe and North America, but already we seem to be heading to recessionary conditions in Europe. America's still weak. It's hitting China. We're seeing that commodity prices are falling off, and we have a situation where the Australian economy is already being hit hard. The real issue, I think, in human terms, is what happens to unemployment. You've got it double digits in much of the advanced world. It's still relatively low here. The human tragedy is if the unemployment rate goes up. But the worst thing the government could do is try to slavishly stick by the projections of a surplus and be cutting back on government spending if we start going into an economic hole. Maybe they'll do that, given what we've seen, although Wayne Swan does seem to be preparing the path to back away from the commitment to a surplus.
Stephen Long, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.